Okay, next thing we're going to do is we are going to install the RAM sticks onto the motherboard. So let's go ahead and open those real quick. That. Alright. Now, I have already checked the motherboard instructions for installing RAM. Because there are 4 slots, you can only install RAM. If you're only installing 2 RAM sticks, you can only install them in certain slots initially. If you were filling all 4 RAM slots in, there's no real reason to check what RAM slot you're sticking memory into, unless you're sticking in like 2 2-gig sticks and 2 1-gig sticks. Then you want the 2-gig sticks in the primary slots and the 1-gig sticks in the secondary slots. However, since I'm going to be putting in matched identical pairs in here later, it doesn't really matter, except for the fact that if you're only putting in 2 sticks of RAM at a time, they have to be put into the first set of RAM slots. If you look on the motherboard, the booklet also details this, but if you look on the motherboard, on this particular one, it's right about here, between the RAM slots and the heatsink, actually written on the board. It labels the 4 RAM slots DIM 1A, DIM 2, DIM, let me read it actually, DIM A1, DIM A2, B1, and B2. And that's referring to the colors, A1, A2, B1, B2. And according to the motherboard booklet, if you are only installing 2 sticks of RAM, they need to be in A2 and B2, which are the lighter colored RAM slots. So, we'll take the RAM stick, and if you notice there is a notch in this RAM stick, right there, that is supposed to be there, so don't freak out if you think that it's cracked or broken. This is an indicator as to whether it should be installed like this, or whether it should be installed like that. So there's a notch there. There is also a little lip inside the RAM slot, so it'll indicate how the RAM stick should be installed. Now, they have these little locks on the sides. Most boards have locks on both sides, however this board only has it on one. This side you actually go ahead and slide it in vertically as it sits. So we'll slide it in there. It's a little bit of a tight fit because of this heatsink. When I get the other 2 RAM sticks, I will actually have to remove this RAM stick and slide the center fan out so that I can reach up underneath, because let me take this back out. If you look, there is this black piece right here. This is actually the bottom of the fan inside the heatsink. As I slide this out, that goes up, and then that would give me room to slide the new RAM sticks underneath. A lot of people have mentioned stuff about this particular cooler is annoying to put RAM in underneath. However, if you know how it actually physically operates, it's not that big of a deal. So, you snap it in on this side, and then push down, and the little lock will force its way back up, and it won't come down unless you put a lot of pressure, and that actually removes the RAM stick. So, there, that RAM stick is locked in place. Now you insert the second RAM stick into the second tan colored RAM slot up front. Again, slide it in on the standard side first, and then the locking mechanism second. And there you go. There are your 2 RAM sticks installed. And you should have no problems with those RAM sticks unless they're defective or something. Throw that away. Okay. Now, basically, your motherboard is at the point where it is in working order. It's got its processor and heatsink installed. The RAM is installed. Of course, I have not attached the fan connector to the motherboard. However, I will do that here. This is a little tricky because of this board layout. Swap over to a flathead screwdriver so I can kind of grab. The power cord is up underneath here, and if you can just finagle it with your fingers, you can pull it out a little bit, and there's your little fan power connector. And on this particular one, there is a CPU fan adapter and a CPU optional fan adapter. This is for heat sinks that actually have two fans, which are getting more and more common for enthusiast level heat sinks. Bend that back down. A couple of these top fins have a tendency to get a little bent. It's not going to cause any issue with heat flow because they're at the very top. But the CPU fan connector is what I'll primarily plug it into. I don't think there's an issue if you initially plug it into the optional CPU fan controller. Come on. You can do it. There you go. Okay. So now, that's in there. Just like that. No issues. Okay. So now that fan is connected. This fan will now spin when the motherboard is powered on, and it will spin at full speed or at speeds indicated by the settings you set on the motherboard BIOS. You can tell it to only spin certain RPMs at certain levels. Now, our next step would be actually putting this guy in the case. So, let me set him out of the way. Now, next thing you're going to want to grab is the motherboard backplane, because these are specific to the motherboard, not specific to the case, because they have the holes for the connectors on the board. Okay, so let's lift the case up here. Alright, I hope y'all can see this relatively well. I kind of took an eyeball of it, and it looks like you can see it at least halfway decent. Now, this motherboard tray already has these brass standoffs screwed into it at every screw point that the motherboard meets with. You need to make sure you have all of these brass standoffs screwed into the motherboard tray, because if you screw the motherboard directly to the tray instead of onto these brass standoffs, probably see that one easier, instead of on these brass standoffs, this metal tray has a tendency of shorting out the bottom of the motherboard, frying your system. Bad idea. Now, one thing I do love about this case is that the motherboard tray is removable. This is an option that is getting more and more common on higher end cases because they realize that it's getting difficult to install some of the motherboards inside the systems. So you remove the tray from the case, install the motherboard onto the tray, and then slide the tray back in. Very, very easy. So let's see if I can get this tray out real quick. I think there's 5 screws for it. That there. And then this one should be the last one. Whoops. There we go. Now, in theory, this tray should just slide out if I didn't have this fan physically wired up. Let me disconnect this fan, and I should have a pair of cutters to cut this zip tie. Come on. It's a thick zip tie. There we go. Remove that zip tie. This fan connector is now loose, so the entire tray should, in theory, pop right out. So there's your back container. That pops off. And then the tray, which is also, you know what? Forget it. I'm not going to fight with it. It's more of a hassle to undo all these zip ties that were previously done on Nappy's system. So I'm going to screw the tray back in, which actually it turns out the tray only needs 1 screw to be removed. The other 4 screws were for removing that back face plate, which isn't necessary. In theory, actually, it is necessary, but Now, let's put everything back together, because I was dumb. Throw that connector back in there. There we go. Now, this gets screwed back in. What a complete waste of time. Oh well. Learning experience. Alright. Well, hello. Looks like this has to be installed before the tray, or slid in on top of it. There are little flanges on the screw hole where the tray comes out in, and they flare out and prevent you from reinstalling this in the incorrect order. Which is fine, because now it's fixed. Come on. Snap back into place. There we go. There. Now I can screw that back in. The only downside with modular cases that are this modular is you start running into stuff where you'll take parts off that you didn't really need to take off. There you go. Whoop! That didn't work. Let's loosen that up a bit so I can get some screw space. Last one, okay. And screw that one in all the way. Now, I will reroute those cables later. Now, since it'll be a little difficult for you to see, this will actually need to get installed like that, since these connectors need to go out this hole. I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but you need to install this first. So, put it like that. I know y'all can at least see part of this. This gets snapped in from the inside. Well, come on. There we go. Oh, come on. Alright. Now that that's all snapped into place, we will lift the motherboard and set it on in there. Keep in mind that you want to keep, it's probably hard to see, but there are screw holes here, here, and here running up the length of the motherboard. So there's 2, 4, 6, one there, and then these two are actually here. And they need to line up to these brass standoffs that we were referring to earlier. At the same time, you have to line up the connectors on the back plate, which, if everything was set up correctly, it should just line right up, no problem. See? Just like that. Easiest thing to do is to line up the audio connectors, because they're the ones most of the time that have the most snug setup. There. Alright, so the back connectors are lined up on that back plane, and as I'm looking down on the motherboard, all these brass standoffs do look like they're in the right spot. So, next step is to screw everything down and then start connecting some stuff.